I thought it'd be a great time to go over all the different conjugations of the verb tenses so that we can see similarities and differences. As you start learning, you start with the present tense and you learn that the AR verbs are conjugated differently than the ER and IR verbs. And then you move into a lot of different combinations with AR verbs. And then you move into the preterite of AR verbs. And then you learn the preterite and imperfect of AR verbs and ER and IR verbs. And then after that, you learn the subjunctive tense. And then you learn the preterite imperfecto de subjuntivo, the imperfect subjunctive, moving on to the future tense, and then the conditional tense. And at a certain point, you're like, wow, how do I put it all together? That's what I'm going to try to help you do today. So right now we're going to start with AR verbs. Okay, so all of these conjugations are with the AR verbs. Okay, verbs in the AR. And then we will move on and do ER, IR verbs on all these conjugations. So let's talk about the present tense. If you're watching this video, you know that this is the normal conjugation of the present tense. Hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, hablan. And you know that it's yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, ustedes, ellos, ellas. One person over here, more than one person over here. One thing here, more than one thing, depending on the verb. Okay, so present tense. Okay, now let's go down to the subjunctive. If you haven't learned the subjunctive yet, just act like this is your chance to learn about it early. What you do with the subjunctive tense, and we'll talk about why you use the subjunctive, but just so you know, what you do with it is if it ends, the O is, what you do is you take the yo form, you remove the ending, and then you change it to the ER verb ending. So you go opposite, okay? So instead of hablo, hablas, in the yo form, you use hable, then you go hables, and then hable, hablemos, hablen. Notice that you're not conjugating in the AR verb endings, you're conjugating in the ER verb endings. And then you're noticing that when it gets here, you are doing the same conjugation for the yo as you do for the él, ella, usted, or the third person singular. Okay, so that's a subjunctive. Present subjunctive, you do the opposite. Okay, let's move over here to the preterite tense. The reason I want to turn to the preterite tense is that after you learn the present and all the forms of the present tense, you move on to the preterite. Now for the preterite tense, it's weird also in that the yo form doesn't use the O, just like it doesn't use it in the subjunctive. It uses an E, just like in the subjunctive. But to differentiate between the preterite and the subjunctive, you know that the preterite form has an accent on the E. So you say hable instead of the subjunctive where you say hable, okay? So that's the yo form of the subjunctive. Then remember, this is an AR verb because it's hablar. Then it goes to haste. So basically you're adding a TE to the end of a normal AR conjugation, if you want to think about it that way, or you just memorize. So hable, hablaste, hablo. Weird, this is like a yo form, isn't it? With an accent. Don't think too hard about that. This preterite is easier just to memorize. Hable, hablaste, hablo, hablamos. Same as the AR verb conjugation, but in context, you would know that it would be preterite. And then the last one is hablaron. This is an important conjugation because we'll be using it for a different tense. So look at this. It's ARON, the ending. But if you want to look at it, it's like the verb in the infinitive with an ON on the end. Okay. So hablé, hablaste, habló, hablamos, hablaron. Muy bien. Muy bien. Now we're going to go back to the imperfect. And I did this in a different order for a specific reason. But let's go to the imperfect tense. Now the imperfect tense is also past. It's also past tense, but it's used in different circumstance. Past, past. Okay. You use the preterite in certain circumstances and in the imperfect in other circumstances. The basic is you use the imperfect if it's an ongoing thing in the past, something that happened every year, something that happened every week, something that you did often. Or the preterite is you did it one time. So there's deeper explanations about the preterite and the imperfect, and we'll do a lesson on that. But for right now, just know that they're both the past tense. So moving to the imperfect, let's look at what you do for the imperfect. The yo is hablaba. The tú is hablabas. The él, ella, usted is hablaba. These are also the same, just like the subjunctive. These are also the same conjugation in the yo form and the él, ella, usted form. And then for nosotros, it's hablábamos. And for ellos, ellas, ustedes, los estudiantes, anything plural, it's hablaban. So let's look at that. How do you memorize that? I think you memorize it just by memorizing it. Hablaba. It's kind of fun. Hablaba, hablabas. Hablaba, hablamos, hablábamos, right? Accent on the A. Hablábamos. Okay. So we've done present, subjunctive. And we'll talk about why you use the subjunctive. Then we did preterite. And the preterite and this imperfect don't really relate in any way other than they don't relate in any way. They're different. So now we did the imperfect. So let's work on moving to the imperfect subjunctive. And I know it's weird that I haven't talked to you about why you use the subjunctive, but just go with me. This is a good lesson to watch over and over again as you keep learning these verbs. If you watch them before you learn them, it's the best, because then once you get to them, you're like, oh, I saw this strangeness and I know a way to think about it. Okay, so here I did an asterisk before we start. I did an asterisk that it says no ending change. Basically what that means is there's no ending change between the AR, the ER, and IR verb. It's only one, okay? With this one, there is a change with AR, ER, and IR. But this one is the same. Learn it once and that's all you have to use. So now let's move to the Preterito imperfecto de subjuntivo, which is imperfect subjunctive, right? This is the subjunctive, right? And this is the imperfect subjunctive. What does that mean? This is past tense subjunctive, right? So here you'll use a subjunctive if something is in present tense. And with this, you're using it when it is in the past subjunctive, okay? So let's look at what happens with this one. The reason why I like this one to go right below this one, this is imperfect and it's perfect subjunctive. Let's look at all you have to do. All you have to do is change the B with an R. So instead of hablaba, it's hablada. Instead of hablabas, it's habladas. Instead of hablaba, it's hablara. Instead of hablábamos, it's habláramos. And instead of hablaban, it's hablaran. Okay? So that is totally cool, right? Easy. Once you know the imperfect, you can just change the B with an R and you are home free. So I wrote something down here because the next thing I'm going to do is work on the ER and IR verbs. But I will tell you that the rule that we use for the imperfect subjunctive is to find the third person preterite conjugation. Third person preterite conjugation, right? So here's your preterite, you find this one, third person preterite conjugation. And then instead of using the O, right, you use an A. So instead of hablaron, it's hablaran, right? So that's a good place to start, and then you can work backwards with it. So if you're ever confused about how do I do the imperfect subjunctive, remember, oh, what is the third person plural preterite, or the él, ella, usted, and change the O with an A, exchange it. Okay, let's see what happens. And the reason I'm showing you this now is just as a preview, because we'll be going over this next, is that third person for an IR verb or an ER verb looks more like this, escribieron, right? And then that would change it to escribieran, or you'd say comieron, and you would change it into comieran, right? So this is why we refer to the third person preterite in order to do this change, because it changes the stem, You put an IE in instead of you put an E in an IR verb. And you add an I into an ER verb. How strange. This is Spanish. Gotta love it. But we'll go over this next. I just wanted to tell you that it's not as simple as just changing the imperfect into the with an R instead of a B, because once you go into the ER, IR verbs, you have to do something different. So let's move on to the future tense. Okay, so this is great. This is really great. Another way to look at this, well, anyway, let's move on to the next, and we'll look at this one in a different way. The future tense is very easy. There's no ending change for AR, ER, or IR verbs. Okay, so easy. Learn it once, know that the verb in the infinitive, and add the ending, and you're done. So let's see what you do. For yo, you say hablaré. For tú, you say hablarás. So look at this. This is the verb in the infinitive. Makes it so easy. Once you know that verb, and you know that you as, amos, an, and with these, like in the boot, you need an accent mark. So that'll be the difference. So the way to recognize a future verb is you see the verb in the infinitive, and then you see an accent on the endings, right? No other verb is going to have an accent on the endings quite like this. Hablaré, hablarás, hablará, hablaramos. This one doesn't have an accent. Hablarán, okay? Hablaré, hablarás, hablará, hablaramos, hablarán. So this is like an AR verb, but just this one, they don't say hablaró, they don't say hablaré, hablará, right? This is different. So no ending change, as, amos, an. Very good with the accents. Moving on to the last one. This is the conditional tense. Hopefully you can see this well enough. Interesting thing about the conditional tense, and we're going to talk about why that is used. Again, no ending change, AR, ER, and IR. Let's look at the difference between this and this. The difference between the future and the conditional. The future is going to mean I will, right? Hablaré, I will speak. Hablaré con ella mañana. I will speak with her tomorrow. This is the conditional tense. And this, instead of I will, is I would, right? Hablaría. So what do? IA, IAS, IA, IAMOS, IAN. So if you look at it, it's very similar to this, except for in this spot. I wish we could be the same everywhere, but it's very similar. You just put an I in front of the A, right? And here you do an E, you do IA. These are the same. Yep, we're back to doing the same in these two spots. That shares that similarity with, what do we say? This one, imperfect tense. And these two are also the same, right? So I forgot to do this one. These are the same in the yo and in the LA usted, and also the subjunctive is the same. So subjunctive works that way, imperfect works that way, imperfect subjunctive works that way, and now we can add on conditional works that way. So it's hablaría, hablarías, hablaría, hablaríamos, hablarían. And again, here's your verb in the infinitive. It makes it super easy. And then you just memorize the endings, right? Not too bad. Okay, so let's move on to ER verbs. And remembering that there's going to be just one little detail with an IR verb, but in general, once you know ER verbs and all these tenses, the IR verbs are very similar. Okay, let's look at the present tense. You guys know this already. Present tense ER verb, comer. Como, comes, come, comemos, comen. You know that. Let's look at what happens with the subjunctive tense. Ooh, it switches. It switches to coma. Comas, coma, comamos, coman. So AR verb endings, switch it. But this one, again, is the same as the third person singular. So again, remember, sometimes you're going to have these two conjugations being the same. If this was como, you'd think it was the present tense. So they did make it different. And know that in context, you'll know that it is the subjunctive. And in context, you'll also know that it is the first person singular, yo. Okay, let's look what happens for the imperfect, right? The past tense imperfect, that ongoing tense, right? And then we're going to move to the preterite. So let's do that. So this turns into this, comía, comías. This looks a lot like the conditional, doesn't it? Now that we're looking at this, because this is the same endings, comía, comíamos, comían. So IA, IAS, IA, IAMOS, and IAN, comían. That's the imperfect tense. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the preterite. Okay, so this is the preterite. Comí, right? So you could just take off the A from the imperfect, or you could just memorize it, comí. Remember the AR verb conjugation for the yo is come. Hablé, hablé, that's an AR verb. Comí, comiste, iste. And the AR verb ending was comí, comiste. The AR verb ending was hablé, hablaste. So instead of the A in the AR verb conjugation, you change it to an I. And remember, this is an ER verb. Ooh. Comí, comiste, comió, comió, right? So it was habló with an accent. So this one is comió. You put an I in there. Comimos, right? This is preterite, comimos. It's an ER verb. That's just iste, io, imos. And then this one is ieron, ieron. And this is going to become really important when we learned how to form the present with the past tense imperfect subjunctive. So comieron, comí, comiste, comió, comimos, comieron. All right, let's move on to the imperfect subjunctive. So I like to start here just because it gets my brain on the right track with if it's an ER or IR verb. Remember what we said, find the third person preterite conjugation, which is right here, and switch the O to an A, right? This one is the IR verb. IR and ER verbs are done the same way. Switch the O to an A. So let's do that. We're going to go down here. We're going to go comieran, right? Comieran. Comieron, comieran. And then it's easy. We're going to, here we can go comieramos. And we're going to need an accent on the E because you can hear it, comieramos. If there was no accent, it'd be comieramos. We don't want that, comieramos. And then here, all we do is take off the MOS. Comiera, comieras, comiera. Remember, these two are the same. Same with the subjunctive, same with the imperfect tense, the yo and the LA usted are the same. Okay, let's move on to the future tense, right? The future tense. Remember, for the future tense, you write your verb in the infinitive. You can write your verb in the infinitive in every box. Remember, there's no ending change in AR, ER, or IR, so you've seen this already. So here we go, comeré, comerás, comerá, comeramos, comerán, right? Comerán, all accents inside the boot. This one doesn't need one because this is a two-syllable ending. That's another lesson. Comeré, comerás, comerá, comeramos, comerán. Future tense. All right, let's go to the conditional. Here we go, same thing. You don't need a stem, you need the verb in the infinitive, and then you keep on going. So here we go, and no ending change, AR, ER, or IR. Comería, comerías. This is what we did last time. Comería, comeríamos. Accent, comería. All right. Again, kind of similar to this, but you put an I in, except for there's something different that's happening in the yo. Here, the same thing. Conditional is the same in the first person singular and the third person singular. So here we go. How many of those are like that? We have the conditional like that. We have the imperfect like that. We have the imperfect subjunctive like that. And we have the subjunctive like that. Those are the only ones that have the same conjugations, right? And the yo and this one. And then let's look at what else happens. We talked about the needing to find, if you're in an ER-IR verb, you need to find this third person plural form of the verb and change the O to an A, right? So the other one is easy because in the imperfect, you just change the B with an R, right? And you can't see that right now. But for the ER-IR verbs, you have to go to the third person and take that conjugation and then replace the O with an A. Okay, finally, let's look at the IR verbs. We'll go through this really quickly. Very, very similar to the ER verbs. Okay, present. Escribo, escribes, escribe, escribimos, escriben. Remember, the only difference between an ER verb and an IR verb is in the we that you conjugate with an emos instead of an emos. What happens in the subjunctive? Remember, these two, again, here we go again, these two are the same conjugation, right? IR verb, you need to switch to the AR ending for subjunctive. Escriba, escribas, escriba, escribamos, escriban. And another tip for the subjunctive, if you learned the formal commands and the negative commands, this is going to look very similar because it is the same thing, okay? Where you switch the ending. Interesting. Okay, moving to the imperfect. Escribía, escribías, escribía, escribíamos, escribían. Okay, that's the imperfect. Same as ER conjugation. Imperfect subjunctive, let's look at this. Again, what we did is we took the third person of the preterite and changed the O to an A, right? Escribiera, escribieras, escribiera, escribiéramos, escribieran. Preterite, escribí, escribiste, escribió, escribimos, escribieron. Same as the ER verb in the past. Future, remember, future, just put your whole verb in the infinitive and do these endings, as, a, amos, an, with an accent. Remember, the whole verb with an accent on the ending is going to give you the idea that it's a future. This is the easiest tense to learn. And then the conditional, escribiría, it's really hard to say. Escribiría, escribirías, escribiría, escribiríamos, escribieran. And again, these are the same. First and third person is the same. Let me see if I missed anything else. This also same, right? And this also same. So when you do the same thing in the first and the third is the subjunctive, the imperfect subjunctive, the imperfect, and the conditional. Okay, I know that was a lot, but hopefully that helps you look at everything all together and start to see similarities and little tricks that you can use when you are learning how to conjugate. Then you get really into the process of trying to think of those conjugations while you speak, but that usually doesn't happen until you have a lot of practice speaking and hearing a lot of Spanish, and then by then it becomes natural. But don't feel like you have to think too much to make it happen. This is really about knowing how to do it, when to do it in writing, and trying your best to learn how to do it while you're speaking, but it is difficult. Okay, I hope that helped.